Live. Live.
Hello, and welcome to Griefers Pub. Today,
Hello.
we're going to be discussing the history of the Star Citizen's flight model and suggestions for its future with our special guests, Seven and hybaa. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you.
Can you guys give us a little bit of history about your time in Star Citizen? I know you're part of Liberty's Reapers. You guys are part of a competitive PvP org, but not much is known beyond. You guys are most of the time just in AC, right? Like you guys are an AC exclusive org, right? Or how does that work? That's a joke, by the way. But like, what is your
No
actual like history? Like,
no response at all.
I know.
I can practically hear them blink. It's funny.
Well, it's kind of hard to argue with the state of the PU being what it has been the last few years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
real fucking actual talk there. It
What
is-
for the last entire development period?
I think the last time I spent actual major time in the PU was before early 317.
Mhm.
That was probably the last time I spent actual time in the PU.
Okay. Was there any like specific reason that you just weren't like just performance? A lot of like desync, hit reg issues. What exactly like kind of kept you out of that? Just kind of curious.
It stopped being engaging. It was. I mean, I'd been playing the PU myself since at least 3.7, and that was almost highly exclusively PU until about 3.15 when I jumped into AC and started playing in AC more.
Mhm.
But I mean, after compounding issues, bugs that never get fixed, just the same stuff year after year, it gets to be tiring, and I just didn't want to deal with it anymore.
I think
AC
it's
is easy to jump in and get action, play for a couple hours, and then get off.
I think part of the PU too is once the like initial like shock and awe of like the visuals of the PU go away, you realize it's all just like surface level.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
real
heard it
talk.
very much discussed as like or described as a like a pond, ankle deep. It's very big, but it's not very. There's no depth to anything really in the PU.
Yeah. Yeah. So once that all
Mhm.
kind of fades away, I feel like it's like, okay, what's actually like meaningful gameplay that I can get? And I think for me, like with the old flight model, that meaningful gameplay continued with like trying to learn to be competitive with the flight model, because nothing means anything at all, pretty much in all of the game otherwise.
Yeah, with how there's like no end game or anything like that. The only thing to really strive for was to really focus on self improvement and skill expression for a long time, right? So seeing it kind of change over time and get reduced more and more, like just look different. It's really weird because like master modes isn't the first time we've seen like major changes to the flight model. We've had like 1.3, we had 2.5, 3.14 I think was another. I'm just trying to think back, and then 3.23
3.14
with
was
master
a
modes.
small one. It
Yeah.
changed
Oh,
some
3.7 I
characteristics,
think, right?
but it wasn't like drastic. It wasn't like
We went
when
314.
we
314 was huge, actually.
well
That was the
it's not
asymmetrical. That was the
yeah
power management system and
Mhm.
asymmetrical strafes.
right.
Unified
So
weapons, so it really changed the game completely. Plus, obviously, my favorite period was 314 to 316 with that awesome desync where everybody's looking 90
That was
degrees
amazing.
off of you, shooting from the engines, and then
Yeah.
you kind of shoot from the engines and you kill a guy, and you're like, "Fuck yeah, I did this great!" And you're like, "What actually happened here?"
Yeah, I've been seeing that recently too, where I've been dying to people that are facing totally away from me.
So is there like a previous flight model which seemed to have a concrete vision for balanced gameplay, in your opinion? Is it like, even in like, we're getting nostalgic here, do you have like a preferred one that you really love, or one that really resonates with you as opposed to like what we have now?
I personally wouldn't say that there's a particular flight model that is better than the previous one or the new one.
Okay.
it's like usually tied to how the game performs. I remember
Mhm.
clearly after those dark ages with desync that we got positional combat back, and there were variations. Like one patch, you would noticeably see that people past 300, 400 meters don't take damage anymore by simply inputting tricord. And then you would get the next patch where the damage would be applied all the way to 800, right? So how
Mhm.
do you assess how good the flight model is if hit reg is either, working or not working?
Yeah.
Like, what's the problem here? I am there, I'm still close to the target, I'm not landing, next patch I'm landing. What has changed, really?
Yeah.
Not
So
a lot in that
and
regard. Not a
maybe
lot.
this is a little bit controversial, but when you mention kind of flight models, I don't see that much of a difference between, to be honest, every flight model from 3.7 to today that I've been playing,
Right.
because it's only just few adjustments here and there, systems that are added or removed. And the main difference between previous one and now would be that the old one had the speed stretched from 0 to max, right? And
Mhm.
you I mean, we removed the speeds, yet similar problems still exist. And in the old version, it was like whether you're drifting at 100 meters or 1,000 meters, you still have access to all acceleration, all rotation, and you can just execute any move. And obviously, game completely falls apart, especially in PU on low frames. I mean, low
Mhm.
frames, low servers, whatever. While now, what has actually changed is like violently splitting the speed in two parts, right? Where
Mhm.
ACM combat feels kind of compressed. I think everybody agrees we would like a little bit of speed, maybe a little bit
Mhm.
of adjustment to the speed wall.
Yep.
But Nav mode, besides those 5 seconds that you spool to, survive being ganked by multiple enemies, what else do you do in that mode? Like you spool it, you accelerate, nobody can touch you. You only need to worry about the missile. And every type of flying in that mode is basically just, you're gonna hit something, you need to approach a target, you just press a button, you're on top of it, right? Nothing exciting happens in those high speeds. So
Yeah.
to me, it's still like relatively same flight model, just we access higher speeds with the button. That's all only thing that I find different in master modes compared to the old flight mode.
Master modes is basically fight mode and runaway mode. Um, I don't know.
I
I
mean,
mean,
that's the same with every flight model we've had, though. It's just how you run away.
well, it
I
wasn't
mean,
a
I've
before. It
been
wasn't a mode. It was just you run away.
You just
right.
Now
you
it's
just
runaway
You just
the
mode.
need
the
tricord and
fights.
boost.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
but
fights were just at like Mach Jesus the entire time. That's all it was. You couldn't keep up with the fight.
yeah.
That was
I mean,
the biggest issue I had with
okay,
the
so
previous
I
fight
mean,
model.
yes and no. That's true, obviously, because when you were in a fight with other pilots that knew how to actually fight, I went
Yeah.
over a lot
Speed
of my
control.
old.
Right.
Yeah, I went over a lot of my old videos, and they'd always average around what the SCM mode is now, around 250 to maybe 300, as
Mhm.
an average. But that means a fluctuation from anywhere from 100 up to like 4 to 500 at most, right? Those are like because of the push and pull, you know what I mean, the back and forth, right? You're trading places, you're going back and forth, so there would be like that speed fluctuation. I think the problem now with this flight model, I feel is I don't necessarily want more speed. I just don't like the fact that you hit 235 and then you're like really trying to push through it, and then decouple doesn't really make sense anymore because you're not decoupled over 235 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So
Right, but
I mean,
I think one thing to focus on,
Sorry.
especially in the scale of the game that CIG is trying to build, isn't duels, and it sounds like you're describing duels.
it's true.
Like in
Yeah.
almost
Mhm.
every team fight that we would have, it didn't matter if it was us versus ABS, Shadow Moses, Black Fleet, any other group in the PU. Generally, fights still started going up and hitting that speed wall at
Mm-hmm.
around 1200
Mm-hmm.
because everyone's trying not to die. Whether they have too many targets on them and they're trying to escape, or it's just the speed is what kept you alive.
Yeah.
And even in master modes, like I think it's not even necessarily that it's been overcorrected. It's just that now you can see all the same issues more well displayed out in front of you that we had in the old model.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because, like, as far as duels go, I've looked at clips side by side from the last model and this model, and it's the same type of fight. The angle of attack is just different. Instead of constantly turning in a 45 pattern, you're constantly going in a pitch pattern. Everyone's always like, "Oh, well, it's just, pitch aim, pitch aim, pitch aim." The last flight model was just 45 aim, 45 aim, 45 aim. And that was the majority of your duels. You don't get these beautiful positional fights unless both parties choose to fight like that. And that goes true even now. If somebody wants to continue to keep you at a distance, they can keep going at an angle that allows them to shoot at you while you're pushing in. And if they have good enough aim, you're never going to get in before you die.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It
I
is a
don't
little
know.
bit more
It
black and
feels
white because the
it feels a
restrictive
lot
flight model.
stiffer.
It is a lot.
Still,
I mean, that's what.
it's a
Never
lot
mind.
more
I'm just
stiff.
not going to say anything.
I've heard a few
Phrasing. Are
people.
we even doing that anymore?
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard a few people say it's only if people chose to A, B, and C, but that's not even necessarily true because there were certain
Well, you
opportune
could force
times
it on
when,
people. You could
yeah,
definitely force it on people, but
yeah,
the likelihood of you getting really good fights against someone at your skill level
yeah,
that didn't want to fight in a certain way was very low.
yeah,
Like if just put A plus and I together, if I chose not to fight close with him, he would never close in on me, and vice versa. If he never chose to fight close, I would never close in on him.
yeah.
And I think A plus is fantastic. He's played the game for years. He's got probably the most experience from across the flight models of most people that I know, and it's just it's depressing.
I think
Yeah.
most of us in PvP community have very similar mindset, and we are all kind of trained in the same way. Pass, flare, turn, fight. That's the duel that we do.
Mhm.
And I feel like when we are fighting each other with all our differences and everything, majority of the players stick to that kind of, unwritten code. But to actually see what's possible and what's not possible, you need to be put in a team fight where player does not want to engage 1v1. He does not want to burn his boost and sacrifice somebody creeping up to his 6 o'clock, right? So he
Mhm.
has all that he needs to keep the guy in front, to kite, and if you get too close, blow through, pop a noise, get out. You can do that in duels all day long, except what are you actually training if you do that in duels? You will just have people telling you they don't want to play you because you're boring, you're kiting, I don't want to practice with you, that's it. But it's still there. And from all flight model, I would say we went full circle, where in the all flight model, all you had to do is like fly to the enemy, even if it's 10 of them, start shooting, you get hit to shields a little bit, tricord away, nobody can catch you, nobody can kill you, unless they have an overpowered broken ship like the Hornet just before the master modes or Cartual, whatever.
Mm.
But now, if you have a group of 10 good players and they're standing still together, good luck attacking them. You're going to get deleted in the first 5 seconds. You need Andromeda to actually push into them, because otherwise you're just going to get deleted. And you can see that every day in Squadron Battle public lobbies. If there's a group of good players on one side, the newcomers will just charge in them alone, one by one, and get deleted every 5 seconds. New guy dies.
Yep.
And that's a
Yeah.
problem that you can't solve. If you have some type of limitations to how many ships you can use, which type of ships, then it's a different, feeling, but that's role playing in a way, because you are agreeing to fight with certain ship types, but otherwise, yeah, you simply lack power now to do anything meaningful in a team fight, I would say.
I'd agree with that.
Could you, if you don't mind elaborating, what do you mean you lack power to do anything meaningful in a team fight? Could you elaborate on that a
Well,
little bit?
yeah, it's sure. It's like when you engage in, let's say, a normal flying game, you always have that element of how much energy you have, what's your altitude, what you can transfer into extra energy. So if you, for example, enter a turn fight with a plane that simply outperforms you at that altitude, you always have an option to either go vertical, outclimb him, or go flat or in a shallow dive to outpace him, right? Outrun him, basically. So now when you look at Star Citizen, basically with master modes, you cap at 500 approximately, unless you are in interceptor, right? So you realistically have only a second and a half of maximum acceleration before the acceleration drastically falls because you hit the speed wall at like 2-3 Gs max, right?
Yeah.
So if you engage a group where 5 of them are standing in line in front of you, you boost into them, you're basically passing all 5 of them. But in a group fight, they're not all in line. One is to the sides. So he can quickly just accelerate into your vector, and that's
Yeah.
it. Without
Yeah.
nav mode, you are dead right there. So
Yeah.
when you do practices, 2-3 rounds like this, one team is passive, one is aggressive, nobody's aggressive anymore. Everybody's just standing still and waiting, which could be seen even in Atmo tournament, like in 2v2 or some type
Yep.
of
Yeah, I've definitely
those
seen
gameplays.
that.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and
When both
that's
sides
basically how
were
you play.
Well, I
holding
think
back about like what 1.5 km, right? I think that's what it was. They were
Yeah,
kind of
it's if
keeping
you're too
distance for a while.
aggressive, you
so.
die. If you're
Yeah.
too passive, the fight never progresses.
I think
Mhm.
most of us kind of like this is outside of like 1v1 dogfighting shit and all that. I think most of us do like the fact that now there's an actual conclusion. I feel like where in the past it was literally just the moment shields go down, you could steak sauce your way out of there real quick. You know what I mean? Where that's kind of how the past was, right? So it would be this like big blob of just like people flying in and out of a fight, right? And now with team fights is an actual like ability to see some conclusion to that, because when you're in the fight, you're kind of in it. Right? If everybody focuses you, there's only so much you can do to get out. Right now, everybody's using noise to try to mask themselves while they're trying to go into nav mode. I think my issue is I feel for me it feels like having that where coupled or decoupled doesn't matter. You go over SCM. Once you're out of boost, you're dropping down, and there's not anything you can do to it. And for me, I feel like yeah, I am a little biased. Oh, he's talking to someone else. For me, I
Stuck in the
feel like
can.
it would make yeah, I know. For me, I feel like it would make more sense just to let decoupled be decoupled. If you don't have boost, you can't go over SCM, right? You burn out your boost, you can't go over SCM. But if you're decoupled and you're moving in that vector, like why would you drop? I just don't understand that concept. To me, it makes it feel more stiff than it needs to be.
That's what she said.
I think
God,
the
that's never gonna
IFCS
die.
system. I think the IFCS system that they've got for the like SCM plus is really bad especially when you're in decoupled. Just the way it slows you down, it doesn't feel good. I think SCM plus as a feature kind of just in general doesn't feel good. I think we would enjoy master modes a lot more if either we just had the open sphere or like just an egg to play in rather than this boost to get past a certain level. I think we have too much boost as it is, so it doesn't feel like a real finite resource, because a lot of people hold boost in a fight to either stabilize aim or to try and mess their pip about to be able to get closer or to not take as many hits. Our accelerations are way too high, so our pip accelerations are all over the place.
Hmm.
Which, if you look at old clips of the old flight model, most of your fights had much smoother pip transitions. Sure, there were some times when it wasn't, but generally the pips looked much smoother.
Yeah, that's
So,
true. That's very true, actually.
I do
but I
agree
think
with
It,
that.
I think a lot of what we liked about the old flight model was that breadth of being able to move, even when we kept it slow. Like you could have great fights at, even if let's just go look at duels. You could have duels that range from like 90 meters per second to 350 meters per second in the same fight, and it feel great the entire time. And right now, even though we're still within that window, it doesn't feel good. And I think a lot of that has to do with IFCS slowing you down when you go over
yes,
boost.
I think so too. I agree. I just
Because
think
the
it's too
speed wall, I
jarring.
don't think is necessarily an issue, because you could simulate a speed wall in the old model by locking your speed at
Mhm.
a certain point, so you wouldn't go past that point. and it still didn't feel bad having a speed wall in the old model. It's just the extra bit of freedom, not having a game system slow you down when you're not trying to slow down.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that's exactly it. I think it would have. I don't have a. I don't think anybody wants the 1300 speed meta thing going. Like, I don't want that in a fight
You
at
sure about
all.
that?
No, shut up.
Okay.
But like, I think realistically, without that system slowing you down, I think like a 450 to 500 at max is still gonna feel good. It's gonna keep the tights close. Excuse me, the fights closer. And it's not gonna be like this crazy like amount of distance we used to get where people would just run out at 11, 12, 1300. um Personal opinion, personal take, but I think it would be a little less jarring and less restrictive without it being too open. And I know that one of the problems they were having also was desync at higher speeds got worse, and you could see it, you could visibly see it, you know.
Mhm. Actually, so what was the overall goal for master modes? I'm just going to get us a little bit on topic so we can kind of go over, a few of the things that we were meaning to kind of cover today. The overall goal was to like slow down speeds, get the fights closer. What else? Like really focus
Well, they
on like
wanted
more
to
fight
they
gameplay,
were
right?
they were trying to fix back strafing type meta. I think they were trying to
Mm-hmm.
fix wiggling, none of which have improved. If anything, feel worse, I feel like. And here's why. This is my opinion as to why. um Bro, did you just River? Bro, did you just drop a You're doing the wrong hog
Okay.
there, my friend.
He's just
So
making memes.
yeah, that's funny. So here's the reason why I think it's even worse now, right? Because before, when people were like overly backstrafing or whatever and creating distance or kiting, right? I think you had like a larger like wiggle room to be able to kind of like bait them in, and then you could push past a certain level to be able to kind of like counteract, come back at him, right? Because at some point, if you try to pull, you could get the other person to get a little more aggressive, try to push to get closer, and once they do, you could push back, and then now you close the distance. Now the speed wall is so low, right? You don't want to just like burn through all your boosts also to try to push in. I know we're talking about duels again, kind of, but this is also for team battling, right? Because when you're in a team fight and people are stringing everyone out, they had high speeds to do it, and now it's like, I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought here. I think I just read what Nick was saying.
Yeah, well,
It's okay.
looking at the first thing Nick said about, I know that Yogi said they weren't focusing on duels when they implemented master modes,
Mhm.
and that they were trying to prevent a large amount of separation in team fights, which I think I guess I would say yes. I'd say 80% yes. There's a lot of times where there's the ball for the fight, primarily in squadron battle, is in one area.
Mhm.
Now, there are some times where you do still see those large separations where you have a fight going on over here and a fight going on over there, but I don't think that's going to ever be fixed because that's just the nature of playing the game with different people, especially if you have interceptors that are playing around that are extending a fight into a different direction, or you have a large target in one area that's just like a bullet sponge. The problem with the old model, that other apart from the speed, was that you could be at Jump Town and say on Yella, and then you're right over the top of it. Someone engages you, a group engages you, and then all of a sudden you're 250 kilometers away from the surface. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's
Do you
like
remember how bad that was?
we had too much room there, so you
Yeah.
couldn't stay in an area. Like in an objective based game, like you would lose the objective every time. Now
Yeah.
master modes would make that objective holding a lot easier because obviously there's less room to accelerate to, and you'd have to go into nav mode and be deliberate about changing and getting out of there versus constantly chasing somebody who's going at max speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
That
so
does make me think of when the F8C first came out, like Bob Barker's talking about QTing to group members mid-team fight felt really horrible because you couldn't
Yeah.
lock on because their position was changing that dramatically
time.
every time.
All the time. Well, and Nick had also brought up the network. Their network in general is not able to cope with the speeds and the changes of player positions from
Right.
people playing in the same server from all over the world. You have people's pings that are varying from like 300 to like 15,
Yeah.
all on the same server, depending on where in the world they're playing from. And no other game can play any kind of competitive, quote unquote, at any kind of competitive level with that kind of ping separation. It's just
Mhm.
impossible.
Yeah. I mean, so I was saying that too, like having the lowest speeds, bringing in the fight closer, so there's an actual like conclusion to a team fight, and it's not just this like huge distance between everyone. Everyone's flying at, getting out of the fight at 1300 and all that. Like I agree with that. Um, my biggest issue realistically is just that the flight system dragging you down once you go over 235. I think it's too dramatic. Personally, I
Yeah.
just think it's too dramatic, and I don't think the fights are gonna expand out to the extent they were before. If we had more room up to 450, probably would be good, honestly. And I think it would give us enough room to be able to, because I feel like you're
Well,
locked a little too
I
hard
think
inside a group fight.
too many things are looking at more speed. We don't necessarily need more speed. We need better ship tunings first.
Hmm.
Why is
Yeah.
it that we have accelerations that push us to the speed wall in like a fraction of a second? Like, why is it necessary for us to accelerate, push forward, and all of a sudden be at that speed wall like a blink of an eye? It's ridiculous. We have such a small room to play in, but we get to the end of that so fast, and then our range of weapon choices isn't much better than what we had previously when it was just repeaters because of the bullet velocities. Do you want consistency with high velocity,
I think that's part of the
or do you
problem.
want like high damage but really crazy pips with like your NDBs? No one's even touching attritions. Like
No.
attritions outside of PvE is just asking for trouble.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Well, I think that's part of the
So
problem is the bullet velocities, by the way. And just to make a note, I'm not arguing for higher speeds. I'm arguing for the speeds we have, but with the SCM fucking adjusted. I don't know. It's to me, it's just fucking ridiculous. So it's not the argument isn't just to respond to Thumb. I'm not arguing that we need to go higher speeds. Keep the speeds the same, but it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't fucking make sense. Anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So just curious, do you think the pros outweigh the cons that we have right now? Like,
I
we've got a
think
list
it's
of
nice
some stuff,
seeing
but
people
yeah,
dying in fights now compared to before, where we wouldn't have. You could
Any
you could
deaths?
have groups
Yeah.
fight each other for 2 or 3 hours and have maybe 1 or 2 fatalities on each side.
Yeah,
but you
Versus
wouldn't know who
now,
won because
you'll have a team wipe.
yeah, pretty much everything was like so spread out that you couldn't tell like what was actually happening in the fight typically,
I think
Yeah,
I think
now
a
it's
big part of it
definitive.
is
Okay, if that whole team just got wiped because everyone's right on top of each other. So yes, I think they succeeded in making fights closer, especially with squadron battle. Squadron battle fights are generally much closer and feel better than they did in the old model. They still lack of a lot of expression, being intercepting, which was a valid skill. Merging onto a target even at high
Hey,
speed was a
yeah.
huge skill.
Now it's
Yeah.
Like
not.
being able
Can I
to like
share
stay
the
on an
videos?
enemy as they're retreating, also a huge skill. Less so now, I think. It's still good, but it's not
Yeah.
as hard to do now because there's that speed wall.
Yeah. I was gonna say, can we share the like couple of like
Yeah.
I miss a good merge. That's one of the like main things that I really miss about like previous flight models. But aside from that, that's maybe about it. Like nothing felt as satisfying as that.
Right,
So
and you
these
can
were
you can even
yeah.
you can see the speed transition, and I think it started at like 300 ish, and we go to like over 1,000.
Yeah.
Like, and those kinds of merges, chase just backing up as you see a high speed target, and then nosing off to kind of get the best thruster angle, and then boost into them. Nothing felt so good.
I agree. That's the one thing I really actually miss was the merges in like,
Yeah, Mr.
pre
Merge is actually meaning something.
Right. But
You know,
beyond that,
it was actually a skill.
yeah.
I mean,
But
there's still a portion to that. For example, a lot of times if I see a buck, it's like, all right, he's going to come at me max speed firing. So I just start like back strafing until I know he's about to pass, and then I push into it because I already have that velocity in that direction, right? And then finish him off on the way by, right? But it certainly is much different now. Like there's not like there's not a need for merging the way they used to be, because even if it's like a nav mode merge, right? It's drop out of nav mode and you're at the speed you need to be, basically. I don't know how it
is.
isn't. Go ahead.
It's a shame that the buck would still like take you out regardless, because we all know that's S tier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's the sad thing about merging now is that you can come in from, left field, nav mode, max speed, drop out with 100+ G's deceleration, not even
and not
blacking
die.
out, and then sit up right on the back of the person and just splash them. It's depressing because as soon as you know the distance you need to let go, you need to get out of nav mode because of how IFCS will slow you down. It's like it's cut and paste every single time.
Yeah. Can I just also comment on that, because it's like when we talk about this and how easy it is to come to basically close to a complete stop and be right on them. And there was a video we were watching when they were talking about I still can't get over this. One of the developers was like talking about this problem we have where people would come in and smash right into the station. And I'm like, that's not a problem right now. I don't understand who's doing that with the current flight model, because you literally just drop nav mode and you're good. Like you're safe.
You're telling me
that's
you
probably
never
a lot
jump?
of
You
What's
never
that?
you never quantum jump to Grimhex? Look at the second monitor, look back and like, oh shit, I'm 1,000 years. Splash.
Yeah, but it's not like a wide problem like where the community, we need a fix for that. Like what the hell? Anyway, when you said that, it just made me think of that. Like I remember watching, we viewed it
comes
on
down
this.
to CIG not having a proper tutorial system. Like their tutorial is putting you in the PU and having you do some stuff on ArtCorp. What they should do is something similar to like what games like Cyberpunk has done, where they take you out of the world and they put you into a box. Okay,
an actual simulation.
This is the stuff that you need to be looking at. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. That's how you do this. That's how you do that. And instead of putting you in a place where now they are implementing, they have the soft death of a spaceman. It's like death is so punishing, and with all the bugs in the PU, why are you trying to teach someone how to play in a place that isn't very quick at teaching them anything except how to run from their hab to their hangar multiple times?
Yeah, but even without that, like I agree. Yeah, I mean, most games they have something, right? In this game, it's been very light, to say the least. But it's like even if they don't offer that, and they don't offer any tutorial at all, I mean, how many times are people realistically not gonna smash into a station, not figuring out, hey, I dropped nav mode and I'm good? You know what I mean? Like, even so, it can't be that wide of an issue. And I don't know. Out of all the problems we have, that's like
if you're worried about
lowest on the list.
If you're worried about people smashing into stations, what you need to do is bring back hover mode. All problem solved.
Oh my God, this joke's gonna go for like 30 more years. I didn't have to experience it, but I saw a video on it, and oh my God, that was bad. That was so bad.
HunterNet actually does a great job of 6 depth of field. I do agree.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I hear they use one of the old flight models from Star Citizen or something similar, right?
Yeah,
I still haven't played
like
it.
A hybrid like 2.6 model or something.
Yeah, something along those lines. So let's try to get back on topic. So I'm not trying to like delve on the master mode's bad or like old flight model bad or whatever topic. I think we should be more constructive and figure out like, hey, what needs to be, addressed? Like thinking, what constructive feedback would you personally give to CIG to shape master modes into a proper, flight model? And you guys did actually, hybaa, you put together some nice info. So I'm going to share that if that's cool. So like this is the first thing. And if you want to like touch on this, I'm going to let you just kind of take over because this is your words, not mine.
Yeah. So basically, there's a question whether Star Citizen is a space shooter or a space flying game.
Right.
And if it is a shooter, then it falls into somewhat different category, right? Where we can, focus more on the aspect of FPS gameplay, even in space in a vehicle. But from flying perspective, most of the kills in dogfights is 90% positioning and 10% is the, aim, fine aim, using of a rudder, etc. Those things don't exist in Star Citizen, realistically. You generally try to get position, you try to get behind somebody, which you simply do by just boosting forward above him, get behind him. But aiming really allows people to fly in a negative way all the time, pretty much. Because these four systems, ESP, aim assist, that is basically built inside the ESP. You have a keybind that you can suppress aim assist. It's horrible. You have fixed assist, which is basically bullet nudging because we are all using gimbals now. And auto convergence that isn't so important except when you play airplane games, where especially World War II and Korea era ships, where you have weapons mounted on wings, and the convergence rate dictates your engagement range, etc. Now, these systems in particular, ESP, realistically, we need something like that, which is just sensitivity modifier, something like 2x and 4x, zoom scope sensitivity in FPS games, which is fine, but it usually caused more problem than good. Because before the slight rework they had a couple of patches ago, you had a setting called zone of the ESP and a dampening of the ESP, right? So most players kept the zone pretty big because if it's small, you're constantly going in and out, you're being thrown around because sensitivity changes. And actual dampening, you put it to the lowest because it actually reduces the maximum deflection or maximum rotation of your ship, right? Now, why is that setting so outdated that it works the same on a mouse and on a joystick, for example? Because on a mouse, if you want to deflect with a V-joy max deflection, let's say you move your mouse 3 centimeters to one side, right? The ESP can literally extend that to 6 centimeters and just modify your sensitivity, right? While on the joystick, for example, you are limited by the gimbal of your base, right? So you can't do that. But you would like to have ability to adjust sensitivity when you are close to the pip, let's say in deflection below 50%, but then also have ability to adjust sensitivity above 50%. Because in a close fight, ESP locks you down to the pip. And if the enemy starts moving outside of your crosshair, you are struggling to keep up because you don't have rotation rate of your ship available to you.
Yeah.
So good players, they quickly jump out of the ESP zone and track back, or they use strafes to jump down of the ESP zone and reacquire target, right? That's just something that is probably too complicated even for new players. Like, how do you explain him that shit? How do you explain him that he's losing a raid fight because he's being slowed down by the ESP? And from the perspective of flying, like imagine this, you have a target at your 3 o'clock. You have to rotate towards him at maximum deflection speed, maximum rotation speed. Like, you just smash your joystick or a mouse in that direction, and the ESP will simply slow down your rotation as you get close to the pip, right? There's no moment where you are inputting too high of rotation that the enemy sees your movement and forces an overshoot by counter pushing you. It slows down, right? And then you add aim assist to the problem, which is basically, I think there was a demonstration now that is actually broken in the current patch. But basically what it does is magnetizes your crosshair towards the pip. So even if you would put a crosshair, let's say 2 centimeters off the pip, and you input only up and down, not into the pip, just up and down, it would slowly be magnetized towards the pip. Now, that is constantly taking over in a fight. Basically, you don't have pure aim, right? And we got confirmation that this is also affected with server performance, low frames. So it creates a bouncy effect. So you're fighting those systems more than you're actually fighting the enemy ship, right?
Yeah.
With the fixed assist and the bullet nudging, when you combine all three, like think about duels and flying, if flying should matter, right? You have a system that slows you down when you reach the pip. You have a system that magnetizes you towards the pip, and you have a system that makes you hit the target even when you cannot track properly, because you are hitting when you are next to the pip, not on top of the pip, right? Now, I understand fully that all those systems exist to compensate the lack of hit edge, the networking, the server
Yeah.
performance, etc. But now the main question that I would ask CIG is like, do we just accept the fact that we can't hit each other without these ridiculous auto-aiming systems, so we slow everything down? Or we go down this rabbit hole where we just keep increasing the auto-aim and increasing speeds to actually be able to evade that auto-aim, right? So I don't know. Like in pure flying, I would like to have a pure aim. That's one thing that HunterNet has. You have a pure aim. Like I remember playing that game. After literally 2 days of playing that game with my joystick, I used no ESP. I dueled mouse players. It was great. I boot Star Citizen. I literally can't aim. I can't aim. I'm like my mechanics are not mine. I need to learn and remember how to compensate for every little thing that is taking over my aim during a simple fight. So yeah, that's my biggest issue when it comes to Star Citizen, and we didn't have all these systems like, I don't know, 10 patches ago. I remember clearly in 3.11, 3.12 was when they implemented the aim assist, this magnetism to the pip that I really didn't like.
Yep.
But
Why
now,
did they? So, what was the purpose of implementing it? What were they trying to sell?
You couldn't hit shit with fixed weapons.
Pretty much, yeah.
You had literally an entire meta of just auto gimbal meta, because that's the best and most consistent way for you to be able to hit somebody was with auto gimbal.
which
that's
we
what
have now, basically. It's
Yeah,
just
it's
hidden.
basically a glorified auto gimbal now.
Okay, so they didn't remove the system that was meant to fix the auto gimbal issue that now is a thing anyway. Is that? Am I understanding that correctly? Is that basically what's
Yeah, it
happening?
feels very similar. Before you had a circle in your HUD, and you basically had to be to the center of the circle to have auto gimbal, auto track. But yeah, now you don't have a circle, but you can still see that you're shooting off the nose to hit the target, right? So
Yeah.
it pretty much feels like an auto gimbal, just lower tuning, and it's called fixed weapons. But it's really not fixed, is it?
I know it's
Which patch
ironic,
was
isn't
it?
it?
That they also decided to add the weapon spread. I know that's something that CR wanted to implement. I'm not sure exactly why, but he was.
I'm pretty sure weapon spread is to try to bring things closer. Also, the effectiveness.
so
Yeah,
too,
but the
but-
problem is that
yeah.
they removed the max limit of 1,500 meters for the weapons and extended it out like by double, and then
right.
like so you can still tag someone's shields from 3 kilometers, given you're very, very, very lucky.
Yeah,
But that would stop their shields from regenerating in that moment.
I just
So if
personally.
somebody's chasing, like it's ridiculous. They want to bring fights closer, but at the same time they extend weapon ranges. Like
Yeah, none of that-
easiest
that's-
way would
It's
be
it's counterintuitive, just like through and
Yeah.
through. It doesn't make any sense there.
I feel like
you don't. Sorry, you don't aim the spot at the ship that you want to damage, but then on top of that you have a spread, so you're not really affecting where you're hitting.
Anyway, yeah.
Right.
Anyway, so doesn't make sense, but it increases the TTK, I guess.
Yeah,
That's the only reason I can explain.
I definitely agree with Nix. I would much
Yeah.
prefer to have a damage drop off.
Drop
they
off
had a
makes way
weapon
more
drop
sense.
off. They had a damage drop off prior to 3.14 on NDBs and attritions.
It just makes sense to me, unless it's I guess the only time a damage drop off wouldn't make sense, I guess, it would be with a ballistic, because a physicalized projectile, how is it going to become weaker as it travels further
Yeah, but you can
distance,
also
unless it's
reward people
in that
for
mode.
being closer with higher damage within that acceptable window. Say given 0 to 300 meters, you have like a much higher, significantly higher alpha per shot. Then it drops significantly when you get over 300 meters to 600 meters, and then after 600 meters to like 1,000 meters, it's like almost nothing. So it would reward somebody for being close, but that still doesn't help when there's weapons that don't have that because then somebody will sit outside of that effective range and take almost no damage.
Yeah, again, I'm
Because
gonna say though,
Panthers were the CF repeaters did not have that drop off. Only attritions and NDBs.
oh
Mhm.
really? I feel like
But they had
I mean,
consistently lower damage.
first of all, the weapon spread to me, it's just every time I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is just dumb. In my personal opinion, it just feels ridiculous to me. I think damage drop off makes more sense. And on top of that, I mean, if they're trying to solve the problem of trying to get fights closer together, I think a big problem with that is weapon velocity. I mean, why such high velocities? If you really want people to be fighting at a closer range, if the velocities were lower, people would be forced to get closer to begin with. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, think about when when it was the cannon meta until they just changed that recently. Right. People were fighting with cannons, but they were closer because the velocities were pretty low on them. Right.
Yeah.
Well, they weren't as spammable.
Yeah, and they weren't spam exactly. So, I mean, I'm not saying to make a canon meta, but I think a big contribution to that is like, okay, if we had lower weapon velocities, and then also you had let's say strafes and things like that, and accelerations were a little lower as well, right? So maybe not. So I'm not talking about reducing speeds, but I'm talking about reducing accelerations. Those
Yep.
two things together might bring the fight closer together because well, I don't know. Maybe if you do slower, now that I think about it, if you do slower accelerations from a distance, you have a slow acceleration, you could still be hit. But I don't know. It just to me, it just seems like they're not doing the right things to try to bring things closer together, other than just forcing us to just like a low SEM. And it's still there's still a problem. Like a lot of times like we run across the issue where and I'm not talking about 1v1s, I'm just saying in general though, if I'm in a team fight and one of the guys I'm facing right now is a Hornet and he's looking at me, I can't even push the guy. Like literally he's pulling, like I'm gaining like 30 MS. Right? It's not enough. And I'm just eating those shots. I mean, obviously you do some maneuvering, stuff like that, but it's like, if somebody's really good at doing that, like I can't even push them to close in that
Right.
distance really, you know?
They can kind of dictate the fight at that point. Right?
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, I mean, you certainly do learn how to be able to, you're going to bind your W key to push. I know how to, I'm on a stick, so it's pushing forward. But no, I'm just saying like, so I mean, obviously there's ways to maneuver out of that. Like you can really play with somebody's pip while they're in a Hornet looking at you. But I mean, it's still quite an advantage. There's a lot of damage or DPS while you're trying to close distance. And there's other ways around it. But anyway, I'm just,
Well, it comes down also to their two-step rotation system that they have. So like when you're boosting, you get those higher rotations. Like if you approach a Hornet in say Gladius and you have half boost, okay, and they have over half boost, it doesn't matter if it's full boost or just under, they still have an easier way of being able to force you back onto their nose because you'll run out of boost trying to stay out of their cone of fire, because if you sit in front of them too long, you're dead.
yeah.
Yeah.
See,
it just feels bad.
I feel like that's the other issue I have with the whole like coupled over SEM because of that fact, right? It's like I have to continuously burn that boost until I'm just out, and now I can't really stay outside of his nose. Like I can't do like a positional push where I boost over SEM and continue with that velocity where I can get into a advantageous position, because the moment I let go of that boost, it's gonna drag me right back down. So now I'm forced to burn out my boost in doing so. Does that make sense?
So do you think that like operator modes are going to resolve all the issues that we're having with master modes? Do you think that's going to, like, being able to give a little bit more freedom, less restricted, like
Operating mode sounds like it's a prepackaged master mode almost.
I mean, you still kind of have that already implemented. Like,
yeah,
we have to go into various different operator modes to get different things done with the ships. So I don't think so. Again, for anything that they're going to implement, I would have to play it in order to give a good answer. But from what I've seen thus far, I don't have high hopes that it'll fix it.
Yeah, I don't have high hopes either. And honestly, the operator mode to me sounds like with the whole quantum boosting or whatever the hell it is, it sounds to me like we might end up going back to where we were before. People are just gonna be, pew, you know, they're gonna run out of the fight, and it's gonna be all this shit going on, right? I don't know how that's gonna. I don't see how that's gonna fix anything personally.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'd be okay with them keeping that mode and just like giving us this freaking like a little more room.
I just don't like the button press. I think the button press is very unintuitive and it feels generally bad because with how restrictive our range of motion is, it's almost inevitable that you'll get caught by somebody at some point in a fight. And whether that leads to your death or not is generally up to the quality of them jumping you and or the network of the game.
Yeah. So
There's also, when
Yeah.
we talk about improving the game, usually we focus on one system at a time, but this is a very complicated game. If it wasn't, there would be many games like this. And all these systems are very closely connected. You tapped guys onto damage drop-off earlier, and the variety of weapons that absolutely does not exist prevents any development of certain styles that certain players could excel. For example, a super great short range weapon where you can have a specialist who plays aggressive. He can trade his boost to get close, but then be rewarded because he's applying more DPS. And that concept already exists in other games, like even in the FPS games. You're not gonna snipe with the SMG. You're not gonna, run into tight corridors with a sniper. You're gonna use a weapon that suits your style, suits your skill level, etc. In Star Citizen, you don't have anything of sorts. And damage drop-off that did exist before could allow you to create a weapon that excels close, is mediocre at range, then reverse it, mediocre close, excels at range, and therefore force people to fly to their strengths, which again will give us a clear idea how to actually improve the flight model. Because now we are using one weapon with different ships, different DPS, different shields, different hull HP, and we're supposed to balance the flight model with that one weapon. That's really hard.
Yeah.
do you think that's a matter of like you keep bringing up how the flight model feels more like an FPS game because it's focused on aim? Do you think that's a matter of CIG deciding what it wants from Star Citizen and what direction it wants to take for like a concrete vision? Does that seem like it's kind of lacking in that regard?
I would say that's what's lacking, because I don't really understand what the end goal now is in terms of actual combat.
Agreed.
I know that I'm playing with joysticks and I wouldn't trade my immersion to be more effective, even though like 3 years ago, it was clear that we should all be aiming with a wireless mouse, for example. It's just superior to a joystick. And the fact that every patch that comes, I need to spend a couple of days dueling same people for reference point, right? And adjust my settings to be competitive to the point where I made my, high-end joystick as close to a mouse as possible. And I'm not talking about strafes, I'm talking about aim, right? You need to aim quickly. You need to transition from left to right quickly. If you're using a full deflection of your joystick, you're always going to be late. You're always going to fail to reacquire target after the quick vector changes. So that clearly tells me that this is becoming slowly a game that really doesn't favor joystick overall. Not that you can't make it work, but it's becoming harder and harder. And I can't imagine what people with, let's say, mid-tier joysticks that have maybe plastic gimbal would do when they have to do it like that. Like they would break the stick, just like I broke countless Trustmaster T16Ms.
Yeah, I actually
wall
broke
with them.
Yeah, I actually snapped the so I have the gunfighter, the ultimate, the one that's gunmetal, and I actually snapped the stick in that once. I had to get a new one. And that's on a metal stick, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You pop the spring?
No, it wasn't a spring. I snapped this a rod that kind of comes that where it runs
The
up
connector.
from the base.
extension?
Yeah, the actual rod. No, like the rod inside of it. You know, how there's a twist on it. There's like this rod that sits in the
Mm.
middle, and the wire runs in the middle of it. I snapped that rod.
And that's your aim stick,
Yeah, it's my aim stick. Yeah.
right? Imagine.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
Well,
think it
it's
is
not
a
like you
matter of
can't say
them.
CIG doesn't
Yeah.
use stuff like that for reference, because they have full stick setups in their office and they play around on them too. So I don't know how this feels to them, but generally if I have to try and aim like a mouse with a joystick, I'm just playing the wrong game at that point.
It doesn't feel natural, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
I mean, you
it's like
can't really base it on CIG's like testing, internal testing anyway, because they're not. To be fair, obviously it's. I mean, they're developing a game. They're not going to be testing it to the extent that, you know, people who are in AC just like pushing it as much as they can to the limit. You know, it's not to the same
Mhm.
extent. And I feel like that could definitely have an effect on their judgment of what needs to be done, right? There's going to be limited knowledge. Even if you develop the game, you don't doesn't mean you completely understand how it actually feels under certain circumstances, stuff like that. And if they're fighting each other, it's only going to go so far. You know what I mean? Or whatever it
Yeah.
is. So it's still not even a fair assessment, even if they're using similar inputs.
Oh, yeah.
I think it is a matter of them trying to figure out like whether or not they want this to feel more like a space simulation or more of a space arcade game.
I don't
you
even know anymore. It used to be, I
Yeah,
think
like
that they
it's
wanted.
not very clear anymore. That's the
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
Like the concrete vision isn't there. Like they've got all these ideas, but it feels like they're just kind of digging at random for like ideas on occasion. Even just not even talking like flight model, but just the game entirely sometimes doesn't feel like it has an overarching,
It's got an
vision as a
identity
whole.
crisis.
It does have an identity crisis. It always has, it feels. For at least, I would say at least since about like 2018, 2019. It feels like it's been in a weird spot for a long time,
Yeah.
But yeah,
I mean,
I
that
don't
would
know.
make sense.
But
It'd explain a lot because of how, like, why everything kind of still feels very similar across the board in some aspects. Like, I wouldn't say flight feels the same, but I'd say that things still look the same.
yeah,
Especially if you just shadow box somebody and watch somebody's duels, they still all have the same motion, and like it's wild. The only thing that has been successful with master modes is bringing squadron battles closer that
Yeah.
I can see.
okay.
Yeah.
So there was actually a couple of points on this last slide, Haiba, that you brought up. Could you elaborate a
Mhm.
little bit on this, just so we can kind of hear your like, two cents in case that we miss anything? I don't want to like skip past something that might be,
Well, this was mostly tied to personal experiences over the last 5 years when you're dueling and you want to push into somebody. You
Mhm.
know how in Star Citizen you have access to your acceleration and rotation at maximum value at the same time. So you can be strafing left and up and still rotate right up at the maximum speed of those two axes, right?
Mhm.
So that creates sort of a problem that is usually fixed in majority of the games where movement is affecting how accurate you are and vice versa. If you go, for example, prone in a FPS game, your recoil is going to be smooth, right? You're not going to have a kick of the gun up. But if you don't hit your shot and the enemy sees where you're firing from, it's a one tap to your head, right? You get punished for
Right.
not hitting your shot. In Star Citizen, when you fly left, up, tricord in reverse, whatever, rolling at max speed with the aim assist that we discussed earlier, you still have rotation to track that pip, right? The
Right.
enemy coming to you. And if you get close to somebody, not only is he allowed to strafe in any direction at the maximum acceleration, he can also track you. And to me, it's kind of illogical because, first of all, the game decided to use maneuvering thrusters for all those actions, translations, and rotations. Logic, pure logic says if your ship is being pushed by the right side thrusters to strafe left, if you want to rotate to the right, there's going to be some thruster working against it, right? So there should be some change of the maximum speed and rotation rate available to you at that moment. So maybe that's something that can be explored. And one of the examples I could give you for, if it's easy to understand, is think of a scale where, for example, both strafes and rotations can coexist at 50% input, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the upper 50% is a shared pool. Meaning, if you rotate your nose at 100%, your strafe is locked at 50%. But if you strafe at 100%, your rotation is locked at 50%. You understand?
Yeah.
So, for example,
Depending on
90
what
versus
thrust is
60,
pushing against it.
depending what you executed first, or depending what you
Oh,
told
I
your
see what you're saying.
onboard fly-by-wire computer to use, right? Just like you have coupled and decoupled, you can tell a ship to prioritize rotation or to prioritize strafes. In that instance, if you push into somebody, right, he has two decisions to make. Is he gonna track you and aim you while you are maneuvering around his nose to get a shot? But so if he tracks you like a turret, he's not really going to accelerate away from you. So the guy pushing actually gets what he originally intended. He gets the fight close. While if the enemy is simply strafing away from you, he locks himself out of tracking speed, so you don't get punished for attempting a push.
What
And
what
that way,
Sorry, I was gonna say
say.
what you're speaking about too. Honestly, with like, let's say you have full pitch, so whatever thruster you end up using, following that would only use so much percentage of power after that, right? Whichever you use first would have the max power available, whatever. It's like, just to throw it out there, but like something like that opens up the opportunity for actual like tuning, like, you know what I mean, for I know this is like just theory crafting type stuff, but it would actually be kind of cool to be able to go in and tune the way you want the ship to respond according to your inputs as well. But this is that's just, I don't know. I just thought that would be cool in general, right? Like you could say, I would want the response of my ship if I did A, B, and then C or whatever for thrusters for it to put power this way. You know what I mean? Like it's just in general, I think would be kind of cool. But anyway, back on topic of what you were saying, if you wanted to continue. I make sense.
No, I mean,
it makes sense.
No, I mean, it's like, you know, in an airplane when you need to compensate a lot for a bad positional move, right? And you go hard on a rudder, you usually wobble your nose, so you lose some speed, you lose altitude, and you get reversed by your opponent. No such thing exists in Star Citizen. And I remember a couple of months ago, maybe even more, I remember a video, I think Lloyd made it, where he was suggesting that the recoil gets increased and accuracy of the auto aim system depending on whether you're strafing reverse, side, etc., which was kind of interesting and somehow maybe even connected to this because, you know, we are allowing people to fly any way they want, still have accuracy, still have good hit edge, and the guy pushing gets punished, which doesn't only reflect duels, it reflects team fights because people learn very quickly what they can do and what they can't do, right? And they usually stick to those principles very fast. And that again, like I said, every little system is connected, variety of weapons, um, this type of connection between movement and strafes and actual rotation together with, for example, the speed wall, how you want to implement it. Is it a hard wall that you cannot extend even at a small acceleration? Do you increase the drag when it kicks in? Does it kick in at 220 or above, or it kicks later? Because generally speaking, whether you have a sphere speed wall or egg speed wall, in a sphere like the old flight model, if I'm strafing left back at the maximum speed of that wall, you can't do anything to get to me. And that's the reason why we have master modes, because of the egg wall. I will be moving slower to the left than what you can do moving forward, correct? But then we open up a new problem, which is in order to get to me, you need to breach the speed wall forward, lose your maneuvering thrusters, so you're eating all the shots. And I mean, let's be honest, back strafing, is it really fixed with bad reverse strafe? I don't think so, because you don't need to execute it with reverse. you can push with your maximum acceleration axis, and just flip, right? So if they wanted to stop backstrafing with a reverse thruster, they should have just implemented some penalty, like knock your player out from G-lock, overheat those thrusters quickly, spend more boost,
Yeah,
etc.
my suggestion
you
was
can't-
always to base boosting on overheating rather than just like magical mana pool, right? Like
Yeah.
Yeah,
in doing
Mhm.
something like trying to force that amount of power through maneuvering thrusters or retro thrusters would actually increase the amount of heat that's being built, which would in turn like burn out the amount of boost you could use or something, right? And
Well, that's
penalize
what it was
people.
before.
Yeah, and penalize. Well, I heard that. Yeah, I wasn't around for it, but we talked about it a lot in certain Discord we speak not of. But so, but it's like I feel like so if somebody's trying to abuse like a back strafing type system, they should be getting penalized, right, through generating more heat or something where they got to burn out of their boost faster, and the person pushing them isn't being penalized the same, and they have more of an advantage. I also think that there should be a lot higher. I don't know if this is egg shape, if that's how it would work, but acceleration should be penalized more for trying to push any other direction rather than forward in general. So I actually wanted to comment on a couple of things I read in the chat too. This is how I
Yeah.
see it.
There's a lot going on right now, so I want to kind of catch up on that too.
Well, okay, so Nick, this is just something that caught my eye. Nick said old flight model was horrible for multi-crew ships too, but the tuning was better, right? And then there was a response to that by what is it, Nomadic? Was it Nomadic
Nomadic,
Aviator?
yeah. Yep.
He said yes. Oh wait, where is it? The flight model was never the problem for multi-crew. It's always been gunnery, muzzle velocity. It that depends. It's both or neither. You know what I mean? It was both because think about it. If in the old flight model they increased the weapon velocities, right? It would have been more effective, right? If like they really increased the weapon velocity, or if you go the other way, the with the old flight model, multi-crew ships were bad because people were moving too fast and the velocities were too slow. You bring down, so it's kind of both. It could be either or. It depends on which way you go with it, though, right? Are you going to lower the speed of the ships? Are you going to increase the velocity of the weapons, right? That would make a difference in general. I mean, it was multi-crew ships were terrible in the old flight model. But I feel like an easy solution for multi-crew ship issues are a number of things. First of all, smaller ships, maybe weapon sizes that are under a certain size should only be able to do so much damage anyway. Like maybe they can only damage the turrets, can't really do any real hull damage, right? Why would a freaking size 1 weapon be able to do any significant hull damage to a hammerhead? Never.
Listen here,
Right?
that might be a problem for like some orgs though. Like say Aurora Squadron suddenly, came back and they tried to like fight with the size ones, they wouldn't be able to do anything.
Yeah.
know?
So, I mean, just I just kind of wanted to jump on that. That's really just a matter of depending on what they're trying to do. But yeah, the old flight model was terrible multi-crew. They didn't do anything about weapon velocities that would help. But anyway,
Multi-crew should feel more like not maybe a force multiplier. It should still you should still feel like you're fighting multiple players when you're fighting multi-crew,
yeah,
just
and
that
you,
are right on top of each other. Because right, what would be the point of me taking a Constellation Andromeda, crewing it up myself, and then the 2 turrets, and then maybe a 4th person for the snub, and instead of taking 4 Hornets?
yeah,
Like there's no reason.
You can't
Like,
justify it, yeah.
you can't justify the lack of like if they're good enough, you just toss them. Like if they know their strafes and how to point the nose, that's good enough for the Hornet at this point.
yeah, but at the same time, if you increase muzzle velocities on the multi-crew ships, aka turrets, then you will be in Andromeda instead of 4 Hornets because it
Exactly.
will just swap, right? One will be more OP than the other. Let's stick to the OP one. There's not middle ground at all because it's lacking proper gameplay to engage with smaller ship to a bigger ship.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's-
there's
I mean,
zero reason to take these larger ships
When you
currently.
dogfight 2 Andromedas now that you can do realistically, it really feels like it's just 2 slow radiuses, nothing else. It's
Yeah.
not different. I'm not using side shield phase to let you shoot that while my gunners are working on automated mode, whatever, right? It's just not
Yeah.
not there. Face
Yeah.
to face, but slow.
Yeah.
Do you
I
think
agree
they
with.
could maybe adjust the damage output or maybe the capacitors on the actual turrets to make it like relevant? Or is that not enough? I feel like it's not enough still, right?
Probably
Meaning for
not
like
enough.
multi-crew like gameplay, probably not.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
with the
mean,
weapon variety, you could make a case. Like if the weapons over there were different than the ones you can mount on ships, so they were more punishing. But again, if they're too OP, why would 3 guys grief a station in 3 gladiuses when they can use a hammerhead and 2 turrets? That would do the
Right.
job as
Well,
well.
it's supposed to be. I mean, realistically, there's gonna be some balance, right? There's the like. Let me think. Let's say you have somebody in a hammerhead that's obviously can't be killed by a gladius, and they're trying to defend like people from coming in to a station or something. Like there's got to be some balance in like why you use different ships, right? Like there should be ships that smaller ships just can't kill, but then there's things that smaller ships can do that those larger ships are going to be missing somehow, right? um I mean, because like you said, like they're going to be camping. Otherwise, what are they just going to be camping with all larger or Connies or whatever? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it just needs to be an overall balance somehow. Anyway, um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
There was
So we
but I
something
mean,
talked about
else.
they said previously that they're aiming
yeah.
for a no meta game, which I think is very impossible. I think there's always going to be a meta,
There is
but
every game struggles to try to
like
remove a
everyone's
meta,
going
and
to
every
try
time,
and hyper focus on what works, and
yeah,
people are always going to gravitate what is the easiest way to do well.
yeah.
Right
I mean,
now, it's the Hornet. It's the Hornet Mark A.
every game I've
Tomorrow, it could
played.
be whatever. Like,
Yeah, but every game I played, literally there would be a meta, and then they would start trying to patch out the meta, and people would discover what the new meta is. Like if they're looking for an ultimate, like perfect balance, I'm sorry, but I don't think that ever is going to exist. Like there may be a meta, and then there will be a counter meta. That means right. Because the
Mhm.
meta is going to still have a weakness. It's just
right.
something that works over in a majority of times, right? And then people start figuring out how do I build something that can defeat the meta. Um, I mean, it's kind of
And that becomes the
ridiculous.
new meta.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, pretty much. And not even
Mhm.
necessarily. Like I'll revert back to like Elite Dangerous. It has such a very complex shipbuilding system, and the counter meta is realistically mostly only good against the meta, right? So it doesn't even necessarily become the new meta. It becomes the meta killer, right? So I mean, just the whole idea of trying to make sure there is no meta and everything's perfectly balanced. Like I don't really. I mean, obviously
Yeah,
you
you
want to
would
try to
need
balance, but go ahead.
a weapon variety that we already mentioned, because
Yeah.
then you can counter different problems in different way with same weapon. Like it's no brainer. More DPS, more HP wins. That's it. What else
Yeah.
can you do? Like you can
Basically.
Yeah.
offset that by using a broken ship in that particular patch that takes no damage, like Fury, that can outrange with slower guns pretty much everything. But that's also not the solution.
Hmm. So
Well, and then I think I've talked about this internally and in some cases in some other discords, but like we need different characteristics for some of these different weapon types. Like, why is there any reason right now for us to use cannons? There's not. Like, they're still
yeah.
pseudo viable if you use them in a very niche scenario, but otherwise generally everyone's taking repeaters. Why? Because they're easy to spam, they have a deep capacitor, and they recharge very quickly. Okay, well, what if
Mhm.
their effective range was very small? They acted like SMGs. So, you could drop shields really quick. Well, then the cannons would be good in the mid range and the long range, but they also aren't nearly as accurate because they're not as spammable. That right there could add some variety in what people take and even maybe close some of these gaps that we're talking about with fights.
Yeah.
But I still don't think it solves the overarching issue that it's just generally not fun to fly currently.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think they've definitely come to realize that. That's why there's going to be another change to the modes. I think they were trying to appeal to a larger crowd, and that larger crowd actually felt they're getting more punished now with the current flight system, because those of us who spend a lot of time on it know how to show up and just basically kill them, and they can't really make it very far, right? So I think it got worse. And I mean, realistically, I think that's what I think they've been trying to do, trying to appeal to a larger audience, and in an attempt to do so, they made it worse for them, and it's more
But
punishing.
one other thing too is like hybaa mentioned it earlier. The game is so complex,
Mhm.
and realistically, how you solve some issues is by changing one thing at a time. When when we were getting master modes for the first time, that was one thing we asked, is for them to change small things one thing at a time so that we can see how those changes affected what we already had.
Yep.
Instead, we would get big patches, lots of changes, and then you'd have to spend the same amount of time checking things over again, seeing what worked, seeing what was broken, and seeing how the different systems interacted with each other. And realistically, I think their approach to the flight model is still wrong because they're not testing things in a small, focused manner. It's too broad. So
Yeah.
we're still
Well,
seeing these same issues pop up over and
I
over.
I think notoriously they're known to make these big jarring changes overnight, and then and what they're doing is they're making it more difficult to actually get things working, because the changes are just too large, right?
Yeah.
Master modes was literally just flipping the damn flight model on its head. Like, it just turned it into a totally different flight model, and then they're going back and trying to tune that through adjustments when they could have
Well,
gradually worked their way in that direction. And that goes for anything. I mean, even with the missile price changes, for example, they just woke up one day saying, "Hey, these are going to be the prices now," and of course everybody was up in arms because it was too
but
jarring.
but here's the thing too. It's like they need to make changes, but they need to focus on those changes.
Yeah,
They don't
yeah,
if they change something in the game, they need to tell us about it. You can't you have almost far too many times where you have these shadow changes that aren't mentioned in patch notes. Subtle changes that change the way you interact with the systems, be it with aiming, be it with movement, what have you.
hmm,
And you have to discover those before you can give appropriate feedback on the flight model as they request every time they do these changes.
yeah,
But when we have to do investigative work on what is different or what was changed, then that takes more time. Like, realistically, you could give solid feedback on this current flight model if you've played since it came out, because it's been almost a year at this point. If you played regularly, you have a good idea of what's going on with the flight model, especially if you're just constantly grinding it out.
hmm,
But if you give us like 2-3 weeks after a change, and so many of these other changes are behind the scenes that even if maybe CIG doesn't realize changed because of how interconnected these systems are, how are we supposed to give valid and appropriate feedback to have good changes come to the game?
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So I don't know if so what I'm wondering is if, so I'll start with 7. If there was something like so I guess what's his name, Yogi's looking for like some suggestions on what to do with the flight model or what changes you'd like to see. So if you were to make suggestions on what you'd like to see happen with the flight model, what would they be?
I would ask for lower accelerations on all ship axes. I would like them to test internally boost only being really a small pool, but really effective only on mains. No accelerations on rotations, no accelerations on strafes. You should have all your accelerations and rotations. Um, and then there was maybe even look into some lowering the weapon velocities. Like, weapon velocities and ship acceleration should go hand in hand. And seeing that seeing how the relationship should be for those and how that can help change the dynamic of combat
Hmm.
would be really nice. Like, even if it's just for us to see in like an experimental testing mode in AC, that would be nice, like they did with stuff before. But I would just like to see at least accelerations on ships and weapon velocities lowered, and maybe the removal of the SCM plus, just because it feels awkward.
It does. Yeah, it does feel awkward. I think
Yep.
it would make the yeah, I mean, I would like to see a change in the accelerations. I think that's what's creating that like you said, the old flight model, you had very smooth transitions in the pip, and now it's very like abrupt. I think that has to do with the accelerations of like strafes and whatnot, right? The how quickly you can accelerate. Um, and yeah, it is very awkward the way that when you hit boost, it like speeds up your rotation, your pitch, and stuff like that. Like it is kind of awkward. I don't know. It feels strange to me. Um, not that it doesn't make sense, but and then I agree
Do you
also
remember
SEM.
early master modes when the HUD was bugged and you didn't have any targeting HUD, but people were still dogfighting?
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
at that point, people were commenting on how aggressive the aim assist was, because since there's no HUD taking your attention away from it, you could see how
yeah.
aggressive the shots were being pulled and pushed towards the enemy ship.
Yeah, I
And
remember that for
I
sure.
think that is, since we can't really compare it to the old one, I still feel like that was more aggressive than what we had before. And we still had some pretty egregious ship weapon pulls in the old flight model and targeting system.
Yeah. Okay, so what about? I'm sorry, Dad. You can say something.
I was gonna say like all these changes sound great, but unless we have this is actually the last section that hybaa wrote up, unless we see server network, performance
Yeah,
improve, like there's not going to be any like reason for any of it. I remember getting into a
Right.
1v1 with someone over Monix yesterday, and I was on a US connection. I don't know if they were, probably not, who knows, but they were desynced and they were jumping, teleporting all over the place for me. Nothing I
yeah,
could do about it.
yeah,
And unless we see that like fixed, all of these like critical issues that we're running into right now with like, and like position, it doesn't make any fucking difference unless they like
Mhm.
really focus on this, because this is the biggest problem. This is the
Well, yeah.
reason why we had master modes, but if they're not addressing the server problems, there's no goddamn point whatsoever,
Would you say that you would gladly accept much slower ships and slower muzzle velocities if we got network to be proper then?
What do you mean by much slower?
Well,
10
to the
kilometers
point
per
where
hour.
it actually works properly.
10
Whatever
kilometers
that
per
might
hour.
be. I don't know what servers can handle here.
I don't know. I'd have
Sorry,
to
this is
see
a
it and
school
feel
zone,
it.
sir.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So
that's a really tough one to answer. That's a tough one to
yeah,
answer,
it's tough.
because as much as I would like to see, if it's balanced gameplay, if it's balanced like fights, I'll take it. Yes, it might be a little bit like slower, but if it means that we're actually getting, balanced, combat, what's like overall, I'd probably take it. You know, as long as they're taking the extra step to make sure that whatever they're doing with their ships, it has, like a purpose for like every role. We're not just doing like fucking power creep, because now we're looking at
Well,
what, 2 or 3 new Hornets that are just going to have better weapons, better systems. It doesn't make any sense. I like that 1v1s can be fun, but in the overall like, vision of Star Citizen, multi-crew gameplay and group fights are going to be probably what we're going to see more of, right?
yeah, but I've said
There-
this before though. They didn't. It's not as if it was like they had to sacrifice one or the other. No, there needs to be a good balance between both, right? We didn't have to sacrifice 1v1s. I'm not saying whatever 1v1s or whatever. But I'm just saying it's not
Mhm.
like you had to sacrifice something, right? It was like, oh, either you have good squad battle, you have good 1v1, but not neither, not both. You know what I mean? Like,
Well,
find like a
there's
decent.
generally going to be a knockdown effect if you focus on one over the other.
There will, but I'm
Because
talking.
otherwise, you're
I'm
going to
like
get kind of
saying,
half in on
yeah,
both, and it won't feel good. Realistically, I don't, and I'm looking at this objectively. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody will care how fast we're moving in game, as long as it is an incredible experience to play and have fun with. because realistically, the numbers that you see on your screen for your speed are make believe, and they're only there to show that you are going somewhere.
Yeah.
So that
I
could
s
say like 10 meters per second, but it could look like you're going like 1,000, and then you'll still have that sense of movement. But it's like realistically, the game needs to be fun and enjoyable and a great experience. There's a reason why people play games like HunterNet, DCS, and
Yep.
other flight-related games
I
because
mean,
they're enjoyable experiences.
yeah, it's all relative, really. It's all relative. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I probably to an extent, I don't know, but it's really relative to all the systems, right? The weapon velocity and the
It's how their
acceleration.
physics need to work and interact with the ships, interact with the other systems such as the targeting system. It's like there's so many of these knockdown effects that it's either CIG needs to figure out where the problem is and address it, or it's like they need to start from the ground up, which nobody wants.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
there's also that moment where, for example, in PU, major locations for player activity with a lot of points of interest are on planets.
Mhm.
And in Stanton, at least, like all the major planets have atmosphere like Earth, right? I mean, we might not know much about fighting in space, but we have 100+ years of experience fighting in atmosphere, right? Why does the atmospheric flight in this game feel so bad? Like, why is it
Because
so
there's no like
garbage?
proper like physics at work there. Like
Well,
I'm
we're
worried about
they
proper
built the
physics,
they
though.
built space flight first. You can
Yep.
see they built the space flight first, and then they
Yeah.
transitioned it into a sloppier atmosphere profile.
Yeah.
But it
Gotcha.
feels like you're flying through jello.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You should be like it addressed atmospheric combat. When you dive in atmosphere, you accelerate. When you dive in atmosphere in Star Citizen, you decelerate. Even if you're
Yeah. Oh my
boosting,
slow
God.
It
down.
doesn't make
slow
any sense
down.
whatsoever.
Yeah. And
Ha-
I don't see. I'm worried about the Atmo portion because they're gonna add controlled surfaces, and I feel like we're gonna be
Mhm.
basically playing modern day. It's just gonna feel. I feel like it's not gonna be as enjoyable. It's gonna be tough. I don't know.
So what they need to do is they need to readdress Atmo Flight and then transition Atmo Flight into a more broad version for space flight. Make a great atmospheric profile that is fun to fly in, and you can loosen those parameters up quite a lot for your space flight. If they want World War II in space, which they've addressed multiple times, that's more or less how you're going to get the closest experience to that.
Yeah,
Like
that makes sense.
it makes no sense that we have we live on Earth with atmosphere, with experience fighting and flying in atmosphere, but we have zero good atmosphere flight model for our Earth-like planets.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment too. I like how Nick's put it. Yeah, we need energy gameplay in Atmo, right? So like
Yeah.
diving creates energy.
Energy
mean, yeah.
management and atmosphere would be a huge skill set. And it would make
Yeah.
atmospheric play way more engaging.
Oh my God, yeah, it would. That's a good suggestion for sure. And then I wanted to also ask hybaa. So if you were to tell CIG what you think they should change, what specifically changes would you say they should make?
Well, specifically, it all revolves around, skill-based combat, where when you fail or succeed, you know what actually happened. And aiming is a big part of it. I would like aim to be pure, like in many different games, because they're seriously underestimating the skill of their player base. We don't need these aiming systems to be able to hit. With the joysticks, mouse, controllers, they're great players all over the place. With that said, the flying, the movement needs to be built in a way that is kind of logical. It doesn't need to be realistic, just fun and enjoyable. And when I look at the ships and see the maneuvering thrusters, it really kind of feels like you're flying a hybrid of a helicopter and a plane, right, on steroids. So maybe you should be exploring an option where those two elements are basically two separated flight models that overlap. So they're not separated with a button in nav mode, but they actually overlap. But when they overlap with the other system, they perform worse, right? So player needs to
Mhm.
make a choice when he wants to engage in a higher speed profile or when he wants to be in that so-called helicopter mode,
I see what
right?
you're saying.
And
That makes
so,
sense.
for example, you hit like we now have only repeaters as weapons. Cannons are still better, right? But they have no ammo and they have no regen. Now, if the cannons would, for example, be good again, they would be meta overnight, instantly. If you give interceptors such a weapon, they're again going to be a menace, like a buccaneer.
Yeah.
They need to literally nerf the buck. They need to take off the shield. They need to take off other systems to make it in tune. But if you have a ship that can produce 610 speed wall and the other is at 500, which is every light except the Gladius, that's unfair advantage. You already have more, almost 10 Gs more forward on an interceptor.
Hold on.
Right? That's
Just to ask you, they don't. Weapon velocity doesn't also adapt like or take your speed with it, right? I forget what you call that. Like
No, it's
so,
not inherited
it's
velocity.
not inherited. Thank you. So there's no inherited velocity. So imagine if cannons had inherited velocity on top of that, right?
you would get deleted in 2 seconds.
Yeah, I'm just
Probably.
saying like okay, yeah, but you could adjust the velocity as well, but like that would create I'm gonna use Elite Dangerous example. The plasma accelerators had inherited velocity as well. So if you are pushing forward and then through that you would get more, it would be more effective. But if you were like pulling away from the target, you basically weren't hitting anything, right? So like adding mechanics like that can also really add to like skill based gameplay. It just made me think of
Mhm.
that when you mentioned the buck with cannons, basically.
I mean, you can still do cannons with a lot of the ships that we have right now. In fact, in Atmo, it's better to use cannons because everybody's so reducing their speeds that you can usually hit your target a little bit easier if you're like good with your aim. You know what I mean? Like you'd probably be able to hit like most
Well,
targets with your omniskis.
yeah,
You can,
Right.
but it's situational. To be fair,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
if you jump on a guy with cannons and he gets close and you smoke him with the cannons because you hit more, that's fine. But
Mhm.
then next round he's gonna keep the range, spray repeaters, and you're dead.
Right.
That's it.
Did Elda just solve backstrafing? Actually, well, we did mention how velocity, right, would have an effect on a fight. But yeah, if there was inherited velocity, then that would actually change the outcome of backstrafing. Absolutely. In fact, in Elite Dangerous, backstrafing isn't very effective because of that fact. Because you can't really hit when somebody's
Mhm.
if you're pulling back and you shoot, your inherited velocity brings that weapon speed down to a point where it just becomes kind of worthless. So why not do that?
Yeah. I think that might actually wrap up a lot of things for the discussion panels. Unless there was anything else you guys think you want to touch on specifically, we could maybe shuffle over to like callers and viewer questions if you guys want to do that.
Sure.
Okay. The first one I think is a little bit of a meme, but it's hard to tell. So give me a second. I'll bring it up regardless. The question is, what do you think about groups running all snubs / racers?
What's that? What's the question?
What do you think about groups running all snub / racing ships for like fleet composition? I think that's from Bob Barker.
Realistically, for me personally, it's those ships are small, so right now they survive a lot off of desync. I think that if desync was to be fixed and network was perfect, they would die very quickly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But that's not to
Yeah.
say that their current tunings wouldn't have a place in a ship comp. They're great chasers. They're able to
Yeah.
chase down a target, say that a Gladius can't keep up with, and either finish them off or leave them in critical condition. Like, I don't think they should make up the entire fleet or the composition that you have, but I think that as a support ship, they're very good.
Mhm.
It's just that I don't. Right now, the game is really most people are using all or nothing because it's the best way to let them stay close together with their team.
Okay. There's another question here by E30. I don't know if this was already answered, so if it was, just ignore this. When Maelstrom is added, this is going to be probably theory crafting because we don't know what Maelstrom looks like yet. When Maelstrom is added, would weapon penetration be static or a hang on? It's kind of blocked here. A function of projectile velocity.
Repeat that.
Sorry. When Maelstrom is added, would weapon penetration be static or a function of projectile velocity?
How's that? How do we know? I don't know.
Yeah,
Well, it
That
can
would
be
be- that'd be
anything
dependent.
except RNG.
it could be anything. It could be, you know.
Except RNG, please, God, no.
That's a theory craft, I think.
That
We'd
is a
have to
theory
see-
craft, yeah.
There, it would depend on what CIG does with it. They could either make it a flat
Mhm.
number, this is what's going to happen, or they could try and be creative with it, which is
It's something they'll probably
something
do.
that's just left to the ether.
I mean, knowing them, they'll try to take the most complicated route with it. Realistically, it costs us another 5 years of development at least. Sorry to be negative. Anyway, yeah, okay.
Okay,
We
so
could
here's a
already,
couple of questions.
based on the
You're
size of the
actually
weapon.
very optimistic with those 5 years, bro.
Yeah, you got me there. Yeah.
Always 2 years away, though. That's a real, expectation when it comes to like anything with like Star Citizen or CIG, right? So 5 years, it could happen. To clarify, I was asking when you mentioned projectiles inheriting velocity from the ships. That's what Ether you wanted to like add on to that.
I mean, again, since ships don't, the weapon velocity, the projectiles don't inherit the ship's velocity, it would still be a theory craft. You would think that faster projectile would do more penetration,
Mm-hmm.
but
Nick's is saying it
Again-
does inherit velocity. Is that true?
they don't go faster, I would say. Like if you're but at the same time, like look at it like this: none of our ships are going faster currently than the projectiles. So no projectiles lagging behind.
Okay. Here's a question that I actually have for you guys. How could CIG do better with keeping a consistent vision along with keeping transparency with their projects just overall? Do you think it would be better if, like, say, we went back to, do you remember back in like 2023 fall when they had the experimental game mode and they were showing like some changes and they were teasing it and testing out a lot of the new functions and a lot of the new like flight mechanics? Do you think that would be a good solution to allow them to get like the data that they need but not have to push all these like big changes on like a large scale via patch?
Repeat one more time.
Okay. Do you think CIG could do better with keeping that consistent vision or like a little bit of like transparency behind it by having like active testing in the like experimental game modes? Like old flight model used to have like the experimental master modes build back in like 2023.
I
Do you
think
think
that
they
they
would
should do
benefit
that
from? I would like to see that as well. And
I would like to
I'm
see them introduce, like I said, small changes that they're wanting to see how they work, and then let us play with them a little bit for a couple of weeks, give feedback, but they can't be dropping massive changes on us. Like, we're reworking the targeting system, we're reworking the way the ship's accelerations are, we're also reworking this and this and this. No, it needs to be one major thing at a time, and just that. And then we play with it for a couple weeks in experimental modes, and then they get our feedback, and then they give us another experimental mode with some more changes.
Yeah, just keep it subtle, one small change at a time. That way they have everything well documented out in the open, and
It should be
everybody
incremental
can kind of see the
changes.
progress. It should be incremental, but
Yeah, I don't understand
that-
why they're so afraid of doing incremental changes. Like, how many times did we see? All right, Seven. Do you remember well, obviously you guys remember the freaking arrow meta because they like totally gimped the nose of the Gladius. Like they made these like huge changes in the pools that like just completely like made the Gladius so like
Yeah.
weak. It wasn't incremental. And then what they did was they went
then all of a
back
sudden-
opposite.
Well, then all of a sudden, like there was that time when the Gladius had not a no critical nose, and you had
Mhm.
to go. It would bleed through from the nose to the body once the nose was dead.
Yeah, like there
So then
was
you had like
no
double the HP.
Yeah, there was no incremental change there. It was like this sudden change where everyone was like, "Well, I'm an arrow now," right? Like they don't seem to understand what it means to make slight changes throughout, like slight progressive changes to see how it's changing things, right? It's just like this didn't work. I have an idea. Let's remove all the wheels off this car and see how it drives then. Like it's just way too excessive and jarring. Like, and it doesn't. It seems like they just don't understand the concept.
Mhm.
You know?
Just, slow and steady. That's pretty
Yeah,
much
like slow and steady.
how it could be.
So from them trying to, I think this is what my opinion. I feel like from trying to make these large jarring changes so often, it's actually costing a lot more time than it would to make progressive changes to begin with.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Definitely.
You know, like, and it's and they haven't picked up on that fact. Okay, well, this flight model doesn't work. I get an idea. Let's recreate a whole new flight model and start from scratch. And guess what we're doing again? We're creating a new flight model, kind of, it seems like, with the whole operator modes. Well, we'll see. But like, God, please make like successive, like small changes. Let's not keep
Well, I'm
doing
worried about
this.
some of the stuff that like you can read that's being said on some of the discords as far as some of the feedback that's coming straight from CIG.
Mhm.
It's like
Yeah.
what they want to experiment with, this, that, and the other thing. It's very vague. Obviously, they're not going to give you any solid answers, but it's still one of those, like, even with what's being said, it's kind of questionable about how it'll play. It's like almost like what we've been saying for the last 8 months isn't really getting through
Yeah.
because
It's
it's
not.
been the same feedback since Master Modes was coming out about certain systems.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
while we haven't been getting constant iterations like we were hoping,
Excuse me.
and it's been almost a year since the last time we have gotten any major flight tunings by the time the next one comes out, like
Well, that's a
God knows
management issue.
what the actual difference is going to be.
Part of that is a
Yeah.
management issue, right? Because basically what they did was they were like, "Oh, we're going to focus on the flight model," and then somebody, mismanaged that and said, "Okay, time to switch to something else because we need this now." And
Well,
what happens?
they needed to get 4.0 out, and
Yeah,
that's what
That was
they
the
pulled
priority at the
everybody
time.
off of the flight model to work on the PU to get 4.0 out. And even what was being said in other discords is that the flight model will not get touched until 4.0 is out,
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
and
But
that even
Which
then
is
we would still
concerning.
probably not see anything major until 4.1. But even that estimation got pushed back a little bit, so
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to even estimate. Like I foresee that we won't have any major flight tunings given to us until probably June.
I think that's honestly very optimistic even. I think it's hard to say. That
Right.
was actually going to be one of my last
Maybe.
questions is does it raise any concern that there's been limited to almost no discussion on the flight model since 4.0's launch even? I know that like you said, Yogi and a few other names have been in certain
I
discords
haven't mentioned names.
looking for feedback. Yeah, I'm not mentioning names either, and that's fine. We're going to leave it at that. But do you think it's interesting and a bit concerning that we're not seeing that transparency? We're not seeing it on the actual, like Spectrum pages to get like feedback from the community, whether it be like,
Well,
from the Bobs or from us, right?
I and here's where my conflict is for feedback. Like you're going to get a lot of muddied feedback from people who are either
Yeah,
salty
that's
with the
true.
flight model, people who haven't really spent a whole lot of time with the flight model, and
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to broadly go out and ask for
True.
feedback on the flight
Hmm.
model and get coherent feedback other than master mode sucks.
Yeah.
And
Bring back 3.22 or something
it's
stupid
like
like that, right?
why
Yeah.
it sucks, but why does it suck? Well, if you can't tell me why it sucks, then at that point it's just kind of like you just disregard that feedback.
Well,
And I mean, it was even said that there were people commenting on feedback threads that had spent like not a whole lot of time in the master modes build.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's like you got to weed all that stuff out, and people's experiences are going to vary vastly based on who they're playing with and how they're playing. And realistically, the traversal in the PU is an important factor for the game. And
Yeah.
that's something that the Bobs will have a lot of experience with. Is if it's not fun to fly from point A to point B, then something needs to change to make it more enjoyable.
Agreed.
While
Yeah.
combat also has a huge portion in it, but combat to me stresses the flight model more than a lot of just your general traversal. So you need those people that are putting in, a bunch of hours in combat to be able to see what's wrong with certain aspects of the flight model, what's exploitable, what causes certain issues.
Yeah.
Like they need those valid feedbacks.
So, yeah, and I want to jump on that too, because there's always a lot of argument like, oh, just because, I'm not a sweat doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm talking about, this, that, and the other thing.
I don't have like
I feel
my
like,
feedback's less valuable or whatever nonsense at that
Right.
point.
yeah.
Right?
So
Yeah.
I wanted to jump on that and really point out what you're saying. Like, the reason why it makes sense to take that feedback from the people who are stressing the flight model the most is because quite literally those people know what every little thing they do, how it affects the movement of the ship. Like, they understand it because they have to. Like, to argue and be like, oh, it's not valid just because you're a sweat. We're not all sweats. No, but we still have a very close understanding to what's happening when we're using our controls, right? When we're aiming, when we're flying, whatever.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's not, you can't invalidate that. I would never invalidate somebody who's good at
Right.
freaking mining on how to freaking use a mining bit or whatever the hell. I don't even know what the hell it's called. That's how bad I am. Like, I wouldn't, I couldn't criticize those people and tell them they're wrong because I have no fucking clue. Like, it's not what I'm doing, right? So I don't think, to me, it just makes sense. Like, take it from us. We're not just trying to make it a sweat fest, right? And if you would have listened to us to begin
Hey man,
with,
I like to get into a prospector every now and then.
yeah, right, yeah. Hey, that's your prerogative. But I'm just saying, like, if the Bobs, right, would have listened to what we had to say to begin with, they would have realized we wouldn't have been in this situation where they basically get pigeonholed or cornered whenever we corner them, and they just can't get out of it. Like, they would have had probably more opportunity to get out of the fight than they do now.
Well,
I think,
it's going back to when Master Modes comes out, you PvPers are going to suffer because of this, and this. But the problem with
Quite
what
the
was
opposite.
being said then
Mhm.
is that, yeah, we suffer, but if we also put in the time to practice certain mechanics, and we'll know
Mhm.
something about it that you don't.
yeah, and we
But that
100% said
also,
that on here before it came out.
but it's also one of those things of, like, I've played the PU when 4.0 came out. I've done contested zones. I've done, just sparse combat. I've grinded out, the max rep on the PvE bounty hunting missions. And traversal in the PU feels generally bad with the way it's set up currently.
Yeah.
The button press, the wait time, just everything kind of sucks, especially when you need to cycle. God forbid you need to cycle your quantum drive and you don't have cycle master modes. Instead, it's not a good feeling thing to just play the PU. Like, I had more fun being on foot in the PU, and that's a lag fest in itself than being in a ship.
Yeah.
So what I also heard is the next kill compilation video that you're throwing together is going to be with a prospector.
Oh my
Is that true?
god.
Okay.
They're not kill comps, they're squadron battles.
Yeah, true.
Just 1 second.
CLG's scared they won't put the Herald in squadron battle.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for that one, and it is indeed not on the list for Drake. I was very sad.
Okay, we should probably wrap. Sounds like we might need to wrap up there.
Cuckoo.
Okay, so that
Sorry
sounds like
about
a
that.
good. No, it's okay. It's okay. Do we need to wrap up, Elder? We can do that. That's fine. We've been going for about like almost 2 hours.
I mean,
now.
yeah, I'm good to wrap up anyway, but yeah, I'm already
Yeah.
off of that. It's just
No problem.
she's calling me.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna say with that being said, guys, hybaa 7, thanks for coming in. Thanks for giving some like really good feedback. And I'm really hoping that it's not just falling on like deaf ears, because I know that CIG is pretty like set in stone, I feel, because of like Squadron 42 with its flight model and kind of that vision side of things. But I really hope that, you know, something comes out of this, because it is frustrating to see, like, you know, a project that you're passionate about and enjoy kind of tank and not be exactly, you know, super ideal to play anymore. Like you were saying, like PU doesn't feel as fun to play, and AC even sometimes feels like it can be a little bit like it sometimes even feels like it drags on, you know, like after 2 or 3 like matches, sometimes you get
Yeah,
bored.
I'll sometimes cycle through like 1 or 2 squadron battles, and by that point I'm already exhausted for the day. Just like, I'm gonna go play something more engaging.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Yeah. So
yeah.
a couple of things. I just wanted to throw it out there. So I remember, so it's SC Tool does like the kill tracking, and he adjusted it so now you can't see other console stuff. Like you can't see if somebody's in the area, somebody died in the area, stuff like that. Only your specific kills. Because I know somebody was complaining and said it feels like almost like a hack or a cheat. Well, now it's only reading your kill on the console. So feel free to jump in that Discord. It's really cool, man. It works great. I love it. I get a kill. It tells me who I killed. It tells me what weapon I used to kill them, what they were in, what their name is, right? And it logs it. So it's pretty sick.
Yeah. Also,
Shit, I
guys, if you haven't already, go check out Seven's his YouTube channel, and also go check out the LR Discord if you haven't already. And with that being said, I think we're gonna wrap it up there, guys. So again, thanks for the chat tonight. Tonight's
Thanks
episode,
for having us.
Thanks for
it
having
was
us. Yeah.
great. You guys had like great, like, you know, like insightful like feedback on everything, and it's always great to hear that kind of, you know, thing. This episode's gonna be available sometime this week on YouTube, so we'll catch you guys then. With that being said, good luck back in the world, griefers.
Oh, is that it? Oh,
That-
okay, I guess. All right, yeah, you guys, do we have a place for sending them?
Let's find it. We can do that. We can do that. Yeah. Didn't even think about that.
No, I knew we were ending. I was just, you know, being weird. I like to be weird.
I know. You just like we're gonna send you guys over to Cutlet. Looks like he's live, so
All right, yeah,
go
that's a
show
good
some
idea.
love to him.
All right, you guys
So-
have a good night. That's
You
fun.
too, guys.